Here we go. We are live here at Star Wars Newsnet Live. This is Tyler. I am joined by Brian and Jay to talk all things of the new Tales and Light and Life book that comes out next week, September 5th. Right?
Right.
Sorry, that was I can't even do something that cheesy. No, we're going with Ahsoka episode 3, you know.
Oh, I thought it was
the
from a certain point of view Return of the Jedi this week.
Not quite. But looks like there's a problem on Twitter with the stream not going. But we're here live on YouTube, so we'll figure that out. Hopefully later.
Stretch. I'll figure it out.
But we are here to talk all things from Ahsoka episode 3, what I would call a short but absolutely satisfying episode. I can't wait to hear what you guys have to say. Just in short, I felt like it looked great. The story was great, and Dave Filoni sure does get Star Wars. He gets it. He nails it. And this episode is a great example of that. We're gonna start off today. We're just gonna get right into it. I want to know, like, what were our favorite moments? What were our top tier? This is our favorite spot from episode 3. I will hand it off to you, Jay. Give it to me. What was your moment from this episode that you just kind of felt it?
Ah, man, if we're talking about one moment, it's hard to pick one, but I think that the Pearl Girl emerging from the clouds was a showstopper for me. I thought that was such a cool scene, and then having them fly through and escape from Shin Hati and Marak, I thought that was such an excellent scene with such great action and cinematography. Oh. But overall, that was a great episode. I think close second would have to be Sabine being trained by Hugh Yang and having that insanely cool samurai-esque training sequence. I think that was also really top-notch writing. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Purgle looked just absolutely incredible. I felt, so rarely in Star Wars anymore with live action and, animation. We have so much content. There aren't quite as many of those just jaw dropping. Hello there. Yes, Andrew. Glad you're able to watch live this week. Justin Paul will be with us next week, but please stick around. Go ahead and drop in your ratings in the chat. We want to see what you rate episode 3. We'll be getting into that in a moment. But yeah, Jay, the Purgle looked incredible. We just don't get those jaw-dropping kind of awestruck wonder moments as much in Star Wars anymore, because there is that, content. But that was a moment for me where when you see them come out and you're just like, wow, they look great. You see Ahsoka's kind of her expression. We felt like this episode, personally, I felt as if we saw Ahsoka, really saw Ahsoka. Her personality came out a little bit more. And in that moment with the smile, the jaw drop, she looks over at Sabine, and they both kind of share this moment of that awestruck wonder and excitement both together. And then, like you said, the dogfight and space battle was absolutely incredible. So I full-heartedly agree with you that one was great. Brian, are you good to share yours here, or are you still trying to figure out some of
just so you know, I think it's just an issue between our streaming encoder and Twitter. So I started it over, and hopefully it'll pick up at some point. I'm trying to get it to figure out, but there it goes. Now it's working. Now we're up and live on Twitter. We're there. So I'm with Jay. The Pearl Girl were an awesome reveal. They've been teased for so long between Mandalorian and hyperspace, and in the last week's episode, we just kind of saw them in the clouds up, and and kind of heard the sign. It was finally nice. It was so nice to finally see them, to see the reveal, and to know that we're getting that much closer to finding Ezra Bridger. This episode put such a big smile on my face, and it sucked because it was so short. I was so mad about how short this episode was. And then, that we have to wait a week for the next one. And, I absolutely adored this episode. Jay, I know you said you liked it a little bit better than you did the first 2 episodes. I'm putting it right even keel with the first 2. I think the show is running really strong so far. And I can't wait to see. And it's crazy. Next week, we're going to be halfway through the series already. So I'm excited to see where we end up going from here.
Let's see. Andrew gives it an 8 out of 10. MB Wilson, Harris SmackDown on Ziona was awesome. Perga looked amazing. I would peg that as my like top tier. Like
Yeah,
my favorite moment
let
was
him have it.
everything with Hera. Like just because I love the Ahsoka stuff. If I had to pick an Ahsoka Sabine moment, it would probably be when Ahsoka was floating in space and Sabine looks at the explosion. She's like, Ahsoka, and she's just like, Sabine, have you fixed the ship yet? Like that just felt like I almost felt like younger Ahsoka coming out, like we're just doing this, we're having a good time, hanging out.
It
And
was very Clone Wars-esque. Yeah.
so I would kind of go 8.5 out of 10. I loved it. I liked it more than the second episode, not as much as the first, but I did love it. There were a few nitpicks, and even though it was short, Dave Filoni to me, and a lot of this is probably due to his vast experience in telling 20 to 22-minute stories. This is a little longer than that, but his ability to kind of tie in a really well-rounded story in a short amount of time is not many people can do that. A lot of times, especially in some of the Mandalorian episodes, even sometimes, or just other shows in general, when you see those shorter episodes, sometimes it feels like it's rushed and it really just squished together. I felt like, I don't know about you guys, but I felt like this one, it felt like every character had their moment and it didn't feel rushed or like it was at the expense of someone else. And I really appreciated that, especially with the Ahsoka Sabine. And like MB Wilson said, Harris SmackDown was great. You know, did you fight in the War Center or just sit around and wait, to see who came out on top? That to me was awesome. And then Brian, go ahead and tell me thoughts on, yes, Harris Kid, Jacen. I know you have thoughts on seeing Jacen Syndulla, Brian. So go ahead and lay it on us right here.
Let's look. Jacen Syndulla, I know we've only seen like a clip of him in Rebels and this one little scene in this, but for some reason that kid has got such a special place in my heart. And I'll tell you why. The entire epilogue of Rebels, when Sabine's doing the voiceover, the attack that we anticipated never came, and it was kind of talking about everything that was going on. That scene when you see the ghost fly up out of the clouds, and and she's like, there was a new member of the Spectre crew by then, Spectre 7, Jacen Syndulla. For some reason, what she's saying there, talking about how her mom was such a great pilot, and we all know how his dad was, and it's like that was such a wholesome moment in that epilogue that I just loved it, and it brought a smile to my face then. And knowing that he's in this now, and then seeing, hearing what he told her, I want to be a Jedi, like that was so cool. And to see him, we were talking right before we went live. He got mentioned like 5 minutes before.
Right.
And I was with you. We're like, okay, well, we're not going to see him this episode. And then 5 minutes later, he comes rolling up with Chop. And it's like, yes, dude, loved it. I'm really glad they kept him with the green hair. I honestly wondered if they would or not. But I was really happy to see Jacen Syndulla.
Did you notice his shoulder? The little pauldron he had on his shoulder was like the miniature version of Kanan's that he wore during Rebels, and did you guys notice that one too? Like that was something that I actually didn't see the first time, and I saw it on Twitter later, and I had to literally get home from school after teaching. I went home and just like went to that scene just so I could actually see it. Because I'm like, you never know what you can believe sometimes. Like, are these people messing with me? Like, no, it actually was there, actually existed. We have Stickman said 8.5 out of 10. MB Wilson gave it an 8.9. Are we going to round up to an A, MB Wilson? Are we going to keep him at an 89? This is the battle as a teacher. I always have to debate. Does a student deserve to be rounded up to an A? Most of the time, no. But, that's how it goes. Jay, what did you think about seeing Jacen Syndulla?
I was actually really surprised at how they adapted him into live action, and I thought like, oh, this is an actually really good portrayal. Like he looks and feels like how I'd imagine the son of Kanan and Hera would act and look like. I think, like you said, Tyler, like I didn't even pick up on the pauldron till I saw it on Twitter as well. And then what I wanted to mention was, Brian, you guys have read Alphabet Squadron, right?
Of course.
I think that entire scene with, Hera, talking to the New Republic and Jacen and all this political talk, I think that felt so much like Alphabet Squadron. And I'm a big Alphabet Squadron fan. I love that trilogy. So to have that scene and to have even just the even with on Twitter, you know, and on social media, a lot of people are discovering like, oh wow, the New Republic sucks. And I'm like,
Yes, it's
It
the
I'm like,
so
worst.
does.
yeah.
It's so bad.
So does.
It almost makes you wish that we had someone like Chancellor Palpatine back running
Ugh.
things. You know,
Makes you really root for the First Order.
we needed someone. Let's go. Wipe these guys out. We're gonna start fresh for the new Republic, maybe. Here after Rey takes over. Lost 0.1 points because no Thrawn. I agree, Jay. Like seeing Hera. So this is my thing that I love. Hera always gets talked about. She's the mother of the Ghost Crew, and a lot of times when we think about a female like kind of motherly character, we think of kind of their benevolence, even their caring, but that doesn't we don't always get to see like the ferocity of that get played out. And with Hera, we got to see her ferocity come out today. Like she takes crap from nobody. She's not afraid to challenge anyone that doesn't have the greater good in mind. And even when she kind of lost control for a minute at the thought of Ezra, him, Ziono, not knowing if Ezra's alive or not, it just shows you just like she will do anything to save her family. And that's why we all know that in episode like 4 next week, the ghost is coming in at the end to save the day, and Hera's gonna, defy her orders with the New Republic, fly in, and we're gonna get the whole "once a rebel, always a rebel" that was in the trailer. We know what's happening. Stickman says he was actually colorblind and didn't realize Jacen hair was green. Was Kanan's hair green too? You are so you are not like crazy in thinking that Kanan's hair was not green. It was not green. It was brown, but it's mostly because of Hera's like green skin and
What I'm
like
assuming.
her just being sweet. That's what we would assume. Could just be a weird kid. You never know. Who knows?
Well, he's half Twi'lek and half Jedi, so
Yes. So Brian, I have to ask you: have you always been like? Has Jacen Syndulla always had a soft spot like for you in your heart?
Yeah.
Because for me,
Yeah.
when I watched the epilogue, like I really couldn't care less about Jacen. Like it was kind of a throw in. But when I watched the episode, the moment I saw him, I just could not get the image of Kanan's last moments with Hera and the sacrifice that led to this kid that. And it just made me think, how much does he know about his father? How much has Hera told him? He called Sabine Aunt Sabine at the beginning. Right. And it was just like, how much does he know of these people? How much does he know of Ezra? And it just opened up this whole world to me that I want to see explored.
When that scene happened, because when did Rebels end? Was it 2018? Is that right?
I think it was 17.
Was it 17? We had some friends of ours that had just become parents for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And so having a little one added to our little group and then seeing something like that, for some reason it hit a warm chord in my heart. And I was just like, that's really cool, and, I mean, it's kind of a bittersweet thing, that he was there, he never got to know his dad. My dad's gone. And so it's, it's one of those things that it kind of hit a little kind of personal on me. But Jay brought up something about him earlier about how well he was translated to live action. And I want to make a point here. I want to go back to another character that got translated to live action that a lot of people had a problem with, and that was Cad Bane. And I want to talk about how, just for a second, how, it's an animated show. It's a stylized show. And, Clone Wars was a stylized show. I'm just trying to drive home a point here because I love the way Cad Bane looked in Book of Boba Fett. And I don't see, why I get why people have problems, but I don't see why it's that big of a deal. It's almost like if you look at it the other way around, like let's say the live action version existed first and then they did an animated version of it. It's not going to look exactly the same, so translating the other way, I didn't have a problem with it. Like Jay said, I really like the way he translated. And I just, he's got a warm spot in my heart, especially knowing that he's got to be force sensitive, right? Because why else would Sabine say at the end of Rebels, well, we all know who his father was, right? So he's got to have some kind of force sensitive. He wants to be a Jedi, and it's going to lead to this tragedy because we all know what happens with Luke's academy, right? His temple and everything. We all know what happens. Is he going to be a student there at some point, or is Harry even going to let him train, or what's going on? And so I'm all in on the.
I'll say I don't think it has to be a tragedy. I mean, Ezra could come back at this point, and could he have this reverse role where he almost becomes a big brother
Yeah.
/ fatherly figure to Jacen and mentors him and could possibly train him? Like, I think that would be just a really cool dynamic to see played out. Now, of course, we got to bring our boy home first, but in the chat today, I want to know, what are your thoughts about the Force conversation that took place between Ahsoka and Sabine? And I guess Hu Yang as well was kind of a part of, an ancillary part of that. But we're going to get into that here in a moment. And I really want to dive into that. But first here, poor Hera fought a war to end a dictatorship only to have it replaced by an apathetic republic.
Yeah.
Is that word, like, what's that like for someone? Like, I don't know about you guys, but like, have you ever had that moment where you feel like you fought so hard for something just to see the results of it? Like, can you either of you speak into that even a little bit?
Yeah, I'm former Army, so I deployed to Iraq once, and and we went through a lot of hell, but we still felt like we did some good. And then not to get political or anything, I'm not trying to do that, but then to see how events ended up turning out recently over there and stuff like that, it's like, so what was the point? Like, what?
Right.
Why was the whole point of us even going and and doing all this for everybody? So there's a little bit of a I have a little bit of a personal feel for it. Yeah, it sucks.
That's something you can probably relate to on a personal level than most people. That's like such a real life example.
Yeah, and it's almost, I mean,
I commend, and we all commend you, and we thank you for your service too, Brian. We probably don't get thanked enough for that, of course. And that's such an interesting parallel to make from Star Wars to the real world, because that's what Star Wars does so well in many of our eyes, is connect these real world problems, these real world feelings we have into our daily lives. And Jay, what would you want to like just add on to that, even like in terms of your personal experience and like how you think Star Wars is able to translate, that sense of apathy?
I mean, I think that as like a fan of the books, and MB Wilson was bringing up Bloodline, and then I brought up Alphabet Squadron. I think that the books have done a great job at just exploring like the political side of it all. And even I think this, even like, I'm going through Heir to the Empire for the first time, and I'm reading that too, and I'm like, oh, this it's kind of interesting how even back then the idea of the New Republic being like an apathetic republic, like Johan suggested, that I just noticed that username, Johan Iguana Bach. I really appreciate that. That makes me laugh. But I think that these kind of, I mean, just like we know throughout history, government is hard. And then sometimes you topple one dictator and then another follows soon after. So I think that it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out, and it'll be interesting to, like a lot of people are saying, how this points to the First Order and its rise.
So I just grabbed my copy of Bloodline off my bookshelf behind me, and it does say in the opening, it takes place about 20 years into the New Republic's regime. So Mon Mothma is no longer, she's long gone as chancellor and stuff by this time. So I would say Bloodlines, I would say a good 10 years out, because this takes place, around 8-9 years after Return, and Bloodline's supposed to be about 10 years ish before The Force Awakens. So I would say, probably looking around 10 more years before Bloodline, which makes some sense if Hera's going to go through this journey of seeing how horrible the New Republic is. I would assume that her and Leia had some interaction within, the rebellion. And when Leia leaves and forms the Resistance, I have a hard time thinking that Hera's not right there. We don't see her in the sequel trilogy until Lando brings the fleet. We don't know it's her, but we see the ghost. And so I hope that is something possibly that can be explored later on. I think that would be awesome. Any final thoughts on any of that before we get into kind of the meat and potatoes of this episode with the Force?
Yeah, I got one more thing I want to add. Talking about I want to go back to this comment about the apathetic republic. It's interesting now because Bloodline got brought up, and we were talking about how the First Order came about, and if you think about, the New Republic was they're nothing. Don't worry about them. They're just nothing. They ignored the problem until it became a huge problem, obviously, and they underestimated the problem, and it turned into this whole trying to be a new empire thing, right? We know where this story is going. We know Thrawn's going to come back with the remnant of the Republic or of the Empire at some point. We know that's what it's leading to. And it's going to be an all-out war again. Now that Hera is talking about, I'm trying to stop another war, that should tell you everything you need. There's going to be another war coming. It's going to be the final battle. The Battle of Jakku is no longer the end of the Empire.
Right.
It's going to be this. And so, and I get why we haven't talked about this in, past books, because it wasn't, part of the story. I get that. But isn't it interesting how by the time the story is done, the New Republic will have dealt with an uprising of the Imperial remnant, beat it again, obviously, because we know the New Republic goes on to the sequel trilogy era, is going to beat the Empire, and then still when the First Order comes up, they're still going to be like, don't worry about them. They're not a problem. Like, we beat the Empire twice. Don't worry about them. We got them. And then, it's just the arrogance, the hubris, which is a running theme through the sequel films that I think New Republic is just as guilty of. So I thought it was interesting on how they're setting this up to kind of mirror what happened later on. And so we always talk about how, Dave Filoni made the Clone Wars and it made the prequels better. Now I feel like making this, and it's going to make the sequels better and kind of supplement them.
And I would even to go further on that. I'm curious to see what the New Republic's involvement with Thrawn is. It's going to tie in all this Mandalore stuff. And is it possible that this full-scale giant, maybe, battle or war that we're thinking of is actually maybe going to be a little bit miniaturized to some degree? And it could simply be, smaller, segments, trying to prevent this war. And it's very personal. It's maybe a little bit smaller in scale, but not any less important. And the New Republic is mostly blissfully ignorant of that because they choose to be. And then there is, the interesting things in Bloodline where there are people in the New Republic government that are actively helping the First Order and actively, thinking that this is a good idea. And so it's no surprise that they fall, as poorly as they do, which opens up a whole can of worms of what could possibly be the governing power of the galaxy for the Rey movie that comes out in a few years. And I can't wait to speculate more on that in the coming future, which there's just thinking about all the things that are going to happen before then is pretty incredible. So here we go. This was probably the moment in the episode, in my opinion, in terms of just maybe the exposition, some of the important plot points building up, was Ahsoka and Sabine talking about the Force. And Sabine essentially saying, I don't have it. I don't feel it. I'm the worst Jedi to ever, be trained ever, according to Hugh Yang.
You told her that?
It's the truth. And Ahsoka, really, it felt like she was quoting the maker himself, George Lucas. If you think, a lot of people have, surfaced up some of his past statements where he's like, everyone has the Force. It's there in everyone. Just not everyone takes the time to cultivate it, to train and have the discipline to actually wield it. And I do love how Ahsoka really emphasized that. Like, it's in all living things. We talked about that last week for a long time, and some of it was semantics, some of it was just differences of opinion too, of, the Force in all living things. But then she does make a point of talent is a factor, and that inherent talent is really important. And so my question for you guys is, how much of a role is talent going to play in Sabine? Like, how difficult is this journey going to be for her? Are we actually going to see her wield the Force this season? Will we ever see her wield the Force? I really just want you guys to kind of get your opinion on what that conversation both means for Sabine in this episode, but also just Force sensitivity at large in Star Wars. Because I think that did open up a lot of clarity for fans in terms of maybe what we're looking for in Force wielders and the Force itself in the future. And then I would love to hear anyone in the chat if you have comments on that as well. But whoever wants to take it first, go for it. There's a lot to unpack there.
Go ahead, Jay.
So I think that I love the idea that there are like the force exists within everyone, right? It makes it so that you don't have to be part of any special family, any special um, lineage to have abilities in the force. I think that's a really great idea because after a while, like it can get tiring of seeing this person is connected to this person is related to that. And then so I like the idea that if someone is does put in the time and the effort and the training, that they can actually wield the force, maybe not to a certain degree like an Anakin or a Mace Windu, but that they can actually still have an impact, which I think, it goes back to that old question of, is it by birth or is it by cultivation? And I've always been like the idea that, someone's um, whether it be their abilities in their force or in their character is formed by cultivation. And I think that
Absolutely.
that is, such a cool idea, and I'm a huge fan of that going forward, because it does also open up more possibilities for who can be a Jedi, who can be a Sith, and all of that.
And there's so much part of the problem with this whole force, inheritance and everything stems from the Skywalker lineage of all the Skywalkers come of the force. But I always tell people, I was like, let's kind of put that in its own separate tier. I mean, we're talking about a guy, an Anakin, who was conceived by the Force, created by the Force. He's, by all intents and purposes, the son of the Force. So it's a little bit of a special case when you're talking about anyone descended from him. And then a lot of people will be like, well, Rey, is Palpatine's granddaughter and cloned. Well, it's a lame line in everything in the Rise of Skywalker, but the dark science, cloning, secrets only the Sith knew. I think that the dark side of the Force is an element that is able to cultivate into some degree in that. So I hate the idea and the notion that inheritance is so directly tied to Force usage. And we're all book people here. There's so many books in Star Wars where it's just pretty much random. The Force works at random, and everyone has different levels of natural ability. If you look at the High Republic, a great example is how Reath Silas talks about how connecting to the Force is more difficult for him than some of his Jedi counterparts. So he focuses so much on the archives and trying to learn as much as he can and trying to study harder, while other people are able to just naturally be able to. And you start at these different legs, and there's like different points on the spectrum people start at. But to me, it's just like any athlete with incredible inherent talent. Just because they have that inherent talent doesn't mean they're going to, turn into the next great thing. You look at so many athletes that, started with marginal inherited talent and were able to work their way up. But Brian, what do you think?
Well, think about the original Star Wars when it came out in 77. I mean, yeah, Lucas had this whole trilogy written, an outline of it, but remember, he was making up a lot of it as he went. And so when the original Star Wars came out, he didn't know if he's ever going to get a sequel. Had that been a standalone movie, Vader would have never been Luke's father. Luke would have just been some random farm kid on Tatooine that, trained, whose father was killed by Darth Vader. You know what I mean? And so he was able to use the Force. It goes back to the talent thing. It just depends on how much work you put into it. I at this point, I'm playing Jedi Outcast again, and there's a line in Jedi Outcast, and I know it's Legends, but there's a line.
I love the weekly Jedi Outcast updates that we've gotten the last couple weeks.
I'm also playing the original Dark Forces again too, since we're getting the remaster. I'm playing it on PC too also, but there's a line that Luke Skywalker says in that, and he tells Kyle Katarn, if being a Jedi were easy, there'd be millions of us instead of dozens. And so it's and that still stands to reason, because think about, even in canon, the Jedi were still mystical. There were only 10,000 Jedi at the time of the prequels. Not even everybody believed in the Jedi. Not everybody had seen a Jedi. That was one of those things that was like, are they real? Are they not? I've never seen a Jedi. Are they real? Same thing with Darth Vader. It was like, there's spooky stories of him, the boogeyman, but not everybody in the galaxy has seen him. 99.999% of the galaxy didn't even believe in him. So it's when you start talking about talent, there's a very small number of people who are going to have that talent, and like you said earlier, the discipline really cultivate that. But then you also got to look at from the prequels point of view, when you're identifying 2 and 3 year olds who don't have any self-discipline, who don't have any, cultivation really with some of it. Some of it was even subdued. Look at Dooku. I mean, that was subdued, and then he was just dropped off on basically on a monastery doorstep. And so I think talent does have a lot to do with it, but I do think, whether we like it or not, the midichlorian count thing still is canon, and it sucks, but it's canon. And so I think that still weighs really heavily on how easy it is. I mean,
I'll push back a little bit on the
yeah.
midichlorian stuff. I don't think it ever was intended by George Lucas for the
Be a
midichlorians
measuring
to
device.
be this measuring stick. If anything, I think it was just a way of him showing that there is a level of natural talent that exists like amongst, and it was just a way to be like, man, this kid has so much natural talent as opposed to anyone.
Yeah.
And, the potential for him is just incredible. And I think Star Wars fans kind of took this as, all right, well, if you don't have this high of an M count, you can't do this. Right. I'm sure there are Jedi with crazy high M counts, but never quite reached the potential that, maybe someone with a lower one reached. I think with Lucas, it was all about, even to an extent, the Jedi had started saying, looking at it like Star Wars fans maybe did, and said, oh, it's all about your imp count. And the Jedi kind of even lost the ambiguity of the Force that Superman said in he wants it to remain ambiguous.
Right.
Maybe they lost some of that and became so dogmatic even and so layered their principles. How many great students possibly did they miss out on? I wonder if Reith Silas would have been able to be a Jedi under the prequel, Jedi who had this very strict label over what a Jedi can and can't be. And there's really no more gray in terms of like how we're going to view Jedi, how we're going to cultivate you. And so I agree that, like Luke says, that's my boy. And so it's a clever plot device for explaining anything. That's how I've always viewed midichlorians. And so I've tried to push back against this, like the power level thing. But I will also say it did create unnecessary confusion. So there was definitely maybe a way that could have explained that a little bit more, because it kind of just shows up in the first episode for a handful of minutes and then goes away. So if anything, I think we should trust Lucas and be like, okay, it's here, but it's not so important. We need to spend all this time debating about imp counts necessarily.
Right. No, I get where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Because remember, Qui-Gon explains it to Anakin by saying, they're microscopic organisms that constantly tell us the will of the Force, and so I guess you're right. The higher it would be, just the more open you would be to it, I suppose. I like what MB Wilson said earlier, more like Chirrut in Rogue One, when they're like, are you a Jedi? And he's like, there are no Jedi here, and he's just, and I think that'll be more along the lines of what it is with Sabine.
Tyler, I want to go back to what you were saying about the midichlorians, because I think you bring up a great point actually about, the count and focusing, having like such dogmatic importance on it. I think that, in all honesty, I actually don't mind the midichlorians. Maybe it's because, like I grew up with, the prequels, and that was all I had.
We forgive all sins of the prequels here in our mid to young 20s. We forgive all prequel sins.
Right. But I think at a point, like, I think that it makes sense if you think about it, that maybe the Jedi at a point did have like a more scientific view towards the Force. Maybe it wasn't so much a spiritual thing for them, that this was like at a time in which they had like a more secular view towards it. And I think that that's also part of like their downfall, right? Is that they also lost that ambiguity, and they kind of lost the magic or the power that the Force gives. So I think that to some degree, I can see, people's frustrations with the midichlorians, but I also think that there's a interesting discussion to be had about even just looking at something through, a purely scientific analytical perspective, and then looking at something through maybe eyes of innocence and wonder.
Well, we see that in The Mandalorian with Dr. Pershing, and Moff Gideon wants to create this army of Force using super soldiers of himself, but they're unable to use Grogu's blood to create those DNA. They're unable to do that. It's not working. It's falling apart. And I think that was Filoni and Favreau saying, yes, the M count is going to matter. I mean, that's why they're choosing Grogu, because of his high M count. But at the same time, it's not this hard magic system that you can just replicate depending on, oh, we have the high M count here. If we transfer it here, it'll do the same thing. Because the Force is that living, almost organism that's embodying everything and has a mind and will of its own. If it's not wanting to necessarily, exist there in that great of quantity and come to life, I don't think it's not going to. And but when it comes to Sabine, obviously she has a very low M count of whatever that is. It's the natural talent is lower. But I love how Ahsoka is like, I don't need her to have this crazy high M count that would have accepted her by the Jedi. I just need her to be herself. And one of my favorite shots from Steph Green was when Ahsoka's trying to do the cup, and it doesn't work, and she's just like, dang it, like, tough, stupid cup, like something like that. She says, you win this round, I think.
Yeah.
And then she walks off, and then she just cuts back to the cup for like 2 seconds, like the cup's going to say something.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys thought that was funny, but it was really funny for me.
I got a kick out of it, especially thinking about, a book that I hate to talk about because, Heir to the Jedi, when Luke Skywalker was practicing on noodles. He was basically trying to use the Force to pull a noodle across the table. And, like Ahsoka said, start small. And I'm like, oh, yeah, you have to. You got to start small, and work your way. So I thought that was a really nice time. And, yeah, I like what you said when she, the extra cut back to the cup. It just it really drove home that kind of humorous point. And, yeah, and it kind of showed her quirkiness and her attitude a bit towards it. And part of me really expected the cup to move. Almost like, remember at the end of X-Men 3 when Magneto lost his powers and he's like just, everybody, the chess piece, and everybody's arguing whether it moved or not. I was hoping for something like that, but I liked what we got. It was all right.
Can you imagine if it moved just even this a little bit, just the discourse that because of course Star Wars fans would be completely rational about that,
right?
And not go berserk, and not just go berserk for no reason. Before I want to talk about the space battle because it was awesome, but real quick, so this is just a thing I had. I want to know if you guys thought this or if I was the only person in the world, because I didn't see anyone else saying this on Twitter. When Hu Yang says you come from a very, a long line of non-traditional Jedi, and he's not wrong. And Ahsoka, clearly starts thinking about Anakin in that moment and turns. The music, it like cuts it dims, it softens just a little bit. And when she turned, it felt like, I was like, could the flashback happen right there? Or just, could we hear his voice? Something like that. Did your minds go there at all? Or was it just like, it was a good moment of quiet reflection and go, just for a split second, I thought, whoa, is it going to shock me right now? Because I was not expecting it, but because she goes, and then it goes, to Sabine or whatever. But anyway, I just want to know, did even your mind think that for a second, or was it just me kind of wishful thinking going nuts there?
I didn't even notice it, but now that you said it, I'm thinking back. Yeah, it never dawned on me. But you got to think about Ahsoka too. How many times has she reached out to try to feel Anakin, and she never felt anything? Maybe that was just the first little nudge of her, like, what, just catching a glimpse of him around maybe. So I don't know. I'd never even thought about it till you just said that though.
Yeah, I didn't notice it either. I think that it's mainly because I think it's still too early for him to show up.
Yeah.
And I think we're all expecting episode 5 to be it.
Right.
So
that's what my assumption was, but I almost didn't know, because you could have like a full-blown Anakin show up in episode 5, but I was like, could there even be just like, how in Force Awakens when Rey has her vision and you just hear little bits and pieces of the different Jedi's voices? I was just for a second wondering, could we just get like a little whisper of Ahsoka or something like that in Hayden's voice?
It actually sounded like Matt Lanter when you just said that. So that was
I actually am Matt Lanter.
Are you?
Actually just,
that's pretty good.
I go by, middle school teacher by day, Matt Lantern by night. Do my Clone Wars filming at night. That's what I'm doing.
That was
But
pretty good.
hold on, Jonathan. Forgive me, Ulenberg. I believe I thought it had an interesting one here. I wonder how it's going to work with Sabine having Ezra's lightsaber, and how he will have gone all those years without it. We can take a moment and speculate on that if you guys want. Just how Ezra maybe has been surviving, because we don't know anything about what's going on. What do you think is Ezra's state going to be in? Like, just a quick speculation before we talk about the space battle.
He's the god of a people. I'm just kidding. He fell from the sky. No, I don't know.
He's sitting back eating a Melu run, just like,
you guys are here.
You weren't supposed to come for me.
He's getting fed grapes by little creatures like this tall, and
But what? I don't want to go back
here. I'm not the Ezra you're looking for.
It's like Emperor's New Groove going on. He's building Kustopia, Ezratopia somewhere.
There's statues to Ezra. You're just like, what? Be amazing.
Jay, can you tether us back to reality, please?
I'll try to. I think that well, obviously we know that Ezra and Thrawn went to the same location. Can I just take a quick moment too to also acknowledge, like, I'm glad they cleared up, like, at the first 2 episodes had like a plot hole where I felt that it was like, why do the Night Sisters have a map to Thrawn and Ezra? I was like, that doesn't make sense. Like, how could they know about these 2 people? But then it made me, like, this episode cleared it up where it's actually a map of the Purgil's migration, their path, which I was like, oh, that makes sense. We know the migration of like butterflies or like of winter birds, right? So I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But going back to, the state of Ezra, I think that it'll be interesting because we know that Ezra and Thrawn probably like are there at the same location. So how much has Thrawn rubbed off on Ezra and vice versa? That will be really interesting to think about. I mean, we already know that Ezra's been cast and he looks a lot older too, which I think is really interesting. Like, here's my prediction. We might actually see like a disheveled, almost like a little bit crazy kind of Darth Maul. Yeah, castaway. We might even see like a bit of like a like that moment where Savage meets Darth Maul. I don't know if he's gonna be like that crazy, like in the Clone Wars.
He's got like spider legs growing down there. Like he's literally got spider legs.
He might have also, even had like, I mean, it might even go the other direction where he might have actually just been training and meditating all that time, which I think would be a really cool twist too, to actually get like a full-fledged Ezra who's more matured and more developed.
I think so too, and I don't think he's gonna just be in this happy-go-lucky state that we're gonna just everything's gonna be kumbaya immediately. There has to be some sort of detachment there even at first. What's going on with the other hundreds of members on the Chimera? Thrawn probably doesn't have his droids to spar with anymore, so he's probably like, next up, like, let's go. I gotta stay fit. They're coming to get me at some point.
Ezra and Thrawn had to eat.
When
just
there's some fat and happy Imperial officers aboard that Star Destroyer.
Yeah. I like this point. This is something I've wondered about ever since the finale of Rebels. I've wondered about this: the windows being blown out on the bridge and then going into hyperspace.
Mm-hmm.
I've always
I have too. How did they survive? Aren't they in space? Like,
did the tentacles fill up enough to kind of block off the broken wind? I don't know.
Purgle hyperspace some sort of force, like air? Like, could it be completely, different? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, also Ezra, if you think about it, Ezra, when he's holding his hand out right after he's been shot, when they're getting ready to take off, into hyperspace, all the glass starts to float around him. And I guess we all assumed it was because of the hyperspace ability for the Purgil, but maybe it was Ezra putting that force bubble around them to survive the I don't know. I'm just now,
Could it
hindsight's
could it
always
be
2020.
similar?
So I mean,
Could it be similar to how the Purgle are able, not always travel, but able to travel? Could it maybe even be similar to how the Loth Wolves move from one side of the planet to the other? Now their world between worlds quite kind of stuff is going on, there, but they're also able to, they have this in tune, this innate connection to the force that allows them to travel point A to point B. Could the Purgle have this, is their connection to hyperspace like this force connection, Ezra's able to connect with them so deeply, and it could, you know, um, possess like a different, because something has to, I mean, or if they just show up, it's whatever, and we'll just be like, okay, it's fine.
mhm.
Has it been 10 years to them? Wondering times pass differently where they are. I feel like it'd be really weird if they did this alternate time thing too much, because you want the ages of your
Yeah.
actors to probably line up. I don't know if you guys disagree or.
They already did it with Octu. Don't do it again. Like,
yeah.
But no, I going back to what we were talking about with oh, where was it? I'm having a mini stroke. I'm sorry, guys.
It's all right.
Back to the way the Purgil travel. I wouldn't be surprised to find out, that instead of hyperspace, because we all see hyperspace, right? What if, they're actually wormholing from place to place? You know what I mean? So
That's a good point.
it's an interesting thought.
So the space battle, like, we got to talk about it. To me, it felt straight out of Clone Wars. I don't know what you guys thought. It felt straight out of Clone Wars to me. I felt like I was a lot of New Hope vibes, but just the whole, it's Ahsoka being on the ship. I want to know. So Brian, overall thoughts? How would you rate the space battle as a whole? Like, what are your?
I loved it. The space battle alone out of 10. Are we rating it out of 10? I'm giving it an 8.5 because I loved that space battle. It was the camera angles, looking through the viewport and sweeping it. It was all, I mean, obviously the inspiration for the cinematography there was taken from A New Hope when the TIE fighters were attacking the Falcon after they escaped the Death Star. It was very reminiscent of that. And it had a lot of, like you said, a lot of Clone Wars vibes to it. Especially when Ahsoka climbed out onto the ship and she's wearing an Ahsoka-shaped spacesuit. And I was like, this is so Clone Wars. The only thing that made it better was if it was just like one bubble around her head. Like in Clone Wars, that's the only thing that would have been. But I was getting serious Clone Wars vibes as soon as she walked out. And you brought it up earlier when she's floating through space and she's like, Sabine, have you fixed the ship yet? Like, it felt like something Anakin would have said to Ahsoka in Clone Wars if he was out there, Snips, come on, and so I really, really thought it was a great space battle. I think it was well paced too. I think, everything, all the, those ships that did explode, that, it just, the whole scene had perfect timing, perfect, what's the word I'm looking for? Tempo, it just beat for beat for beat. And I think it worked really well.
What do you think, Jay?
So I actually really like that action sequence as well, but for me, what made it work was the interactions between Ahsoka and Sabine. It wasn't just straight up action, which is totally fine whenever they do straight up action, but there was a bit of storytelling. It was Ahsoka and Sabine learning to work together, learning to actually be like a master and apprentice, not always being at odds with one another. And so that I actually really enjoyed. I do want to ask and throw it to you guys though, because I had this thought, and then someone else commented on this in our Star Wars review.
Sorry, I'm just laughing at this. He has a special suit related to force ability. It's on the video game. If you like double tap square with the triangle, Cal Kestis will switch his. No,
it's like the flash ring where it just like forms over. But no, going back to the space battle, someone commented this on our Star Wars Newsnet review by Sydney. Good job on that, by the way, Sydney, if you're watching this.
Shouts to Sid.
Yeah, great review. Go read that. We got a lot of comments on that as well. There was one guy who commented, and I had the same thought while watching this. Why didn't they just focus on shooting the ship instead of shooting at Ahsoka? because the ship is this like that was like my only like little bit of like plot hole where I was like,
I have a couple things on that. I feel like I can release all your concerns here and
yeah,
answer
go right
and just
ahead.
help you out here. One, I think the easiest one is they're the bad guys. They're supposed to miss more often than not. And like that's just like why did the TIE fighters never able to, do anything? Stormtroopers can't aim. Like these guys, they're not gonna hit them. Two, for whatever reason, the shields on that ship were so powerful because like they got hit so many times and it did not take them down.
Even
So
after
like
being
the
down
shields
to
were,
10%, yeah, it was still.
and you
They had the
cannot
plot
tell me,
armor.
Jay, if you can look me in the eyes and tell me you would do this, I'll back off. But if you're an evil, space pilot, and you see one of the last Jedi, Ahsoka Tano, wielding her lightsabers on top of that fighter, are you aiming at the fighter, or are you like, I'm going to take her out? This is I'm the one that's gonna do it, and you're firing straight at her. Like it's like, come on. It's like when I saw Darth Vader in Fallen Order. I'm not running away from that guy at first. I charged head on. Now I died instantaneously, but I still charged head on.
That's true. I guess it's like it's like almost like they were blinded by her awesomeness.
She said she was going to go out to distract them. So
there, yeah.
It's almost like in Battlefront, like when you have like Darth Vader or Luke Skywalker show up on the enemy team, everyone's just like focusing fire.
Fire at the Jedi!
Guy.
Fire at the Jedi!
Yeah, exactly. Everyone is just like, well, yeah. I mean, it's also like in The Last Jedi, right? Everyone's just so focused on getting that one person that they forget about the whole mission, and then all of a sudden, like in Battlefront 2, it's like, oh wait, the match is over.
Even though they've already killed 19 of your friends, and you're like, I'm gonna be the one. Like,
oh, that piece of junk out of the sky, and then it's just all fighters.
Yeah, exactly, right.
Oh, they hate that shit.
I want every gun we have to fire on that man. This is really random, real quick. One of my buddies, we play fantasy football together, and DJ Moore is like a great. He's a wide receiver that we both really like, and we've been burned by him several times. But anyway, he had named his team name this year Moore in like all caps with his image for his team name is Kylo Ren screaming in his like avatar. It's Moore. Oh man, I want every gun we have to fire on that man. So MB Wilson said it gave off like serious Plo Koon vibes. It did remind me, like that's one of the first episodes in Clone Wars. I think it's like episode, like 3 or something like that, yeah. 2 or 3, where you get Plo Koon, going out onto his fighter to fight off the droids until help, can come. And it did feel like something that Anakin would say to Ahsoka, like, did you fix the ship yet? Like, as he's just out in space, just chilling. And also at a deeper level, though, having that trust that I'm going to float around here in space, totally vulnerable. And I know that you are going to get the job done. It's like when Anakin so many times would put himself in the line of fire, would, do something kind of crazy and reckless maybe, but he just had full confidence that Ahsoka was going to be there. Now, my one kind of nitpick pushback, and I talked about this with some of my friends, it's like a main critique we have of Filoni kind of as a director, as a writer. Sometimes it's a little too on the nose. For instance, when Sabine put on the little mask and I can't see, how am I supposed to fight? Like, it's just a little bit too much, to Luke. And then with I got him, I got one. Like, it was just, sometimes it felt like a little, like, just too on the nose to A New Hope, like too much. Like, there's not quite enough. Like, Brandon's like, yes, Dave, we know where your inspiration is coming from. You don't have to shout it at us too much. Like, we know, we believe us. We know, we love it.
We know you've seen Star Wars. We get it.
We know that you had breakfast 800 times with George Lucas and you drank the Lucas Kool-Aid for years. We know, it's fine.
I wonder what that's like.
The Lucas Kool-Aid?
Yeah, the Lucas Kool-Aid.
I wonder what that's like.
It gives you you got a high M count in that Kool-Aid probably. Morgan spent too much time and all that gold for the control deck. She skimped on the fighters' guns.
The turbo
Well,
lasers that weren't actually turbo lasers. They were just normal cannons. They weren't turbo lasers. If you think about it, the turbo lasers on Star Destroyers, they weren't anywhere near that level.
They were on the, their budget, the Empire's budget was spent on 2 Death Stars. The Imperial Remnant is fractured. She's one of the last Night Sisters left. They're just lucky to scrape up enough coins to get this thing
the
going.
Empire's had plenty of money. They were going to pay all those contractors on the Death Star 2 still, so they saved all that money. So they had all that.
I'm sure that Palpatine's funeral procession was pretty expensive. That man probably went all out. Like, he probably booked Coruscant for 2 weeks of mourning.
The grief flow.
Oh my gosh. Any thoughts on the Purrgil, just on how the Purrgil looked before we wrap up for today? I thought they looked amazing, and that was my favorite maybe scene of the episode. But how do you guys feel that the Purrgil looked as a whole? The shows look great for me so far.
They translated to live action well, I thought. I wasn't. I mean, as soon as they came up, as soon as you see the shadow coming, it's like, here we go, man. And I'm assuming it was the same group. Was it the same group that took out the Chimera and took Thrawn and Ezra, or is this a whole nother,
I don't know if it's
different
pod of them or what? I'm saying pod because they look like whales.
Right.
Like, is it another pod of them, or
I'm saying
I don't know. Yeah.
you think
It could be different, could be the same. If they're going into this whole migration pattern,
Yeah.
like, it seems like it's reasonable to assume maybe this is, they're going back and forth, and there's a whole bunch of them. Jay, how do you think they looked in live action? Because I agree with Brian that Star Wars creatures don't always translate well from animation to live action, but the Purrgil looked, pretty spot on and amazing.
The Purrgil were great. I think, what's funny was when we were looking at the thumbnail for, tonight's video, they just look like straight up whales, which I think is kind of interesting. It's like, well, I mean, obviously, like that's the obvious connection, of course. But for me, what I thought was really smart though was hiding them in the clouds, so there's still a little bit of that ambiguity, mystique, mystery behind them. It's like, it's the classic horror. What's the word? Trope, rule, like the horror rule. Don't show only like 20% of your monster, right? And it's how they did that, which is really effective.
And keep in mind, it's not the first space whale we've seen in Star Wars.
Right.
We saw
Yeah.
what were the name of the the whale from Empire Strikes Back tried to eat the Falcon. I know what it's called.
Oh, I know.
Space worm, the worm thing.
Yeah.
What is that thing called?
I know it, Dan. I can't think of it. It's right on the tip of my tongue. Because there was a great story for it, and from a certain point of view, Empire Strikes Back. It was an awesome story. I can't think
they would have a story for
and so but it's not the first space whale we've seen. That looked more like a sperm whale, and these look more like great blue whale or whatever. I'm not a whale expert. I've only seen Star Trek. That's all I know about whales. So
Brian is a marine biologist.
I am not. I'm not. But no, I think they look just fine, and I think they translated well, and like Jay said, you didn't see any of them, and a full shot of any of them, and I think it worked. What is it with Disney and large tentacled creatures? What is it? I mean,
that's a whole nother territory.
That's a whole other thing, because we had the Borgullet, we had the Maw and Solo, we've got the Rathars, we've got these things, we've got. What is it with those things with them? I don't.
Cindy Wilson said Minox. The Minox were like the flying bat kind of things that were in there, and they were like, why Minox?
Right, I gotta find out. I don't have my phone on me.
But no, the Purrgil, they were astonishing. You can all join us next Thursday for Brian's Marine Biology Hour. We're just gonna whale watching with Brian.
We're gonna watch Star Trek 4, guys.
Next Thursday is just a live stream of Brian watching Star Trek 4. What is it? The Voyage Home?
Yeah.
That's good. That's good. That's what next week's episode.
Guys, I'm switching sides here. Exogorth. That's what it's called. An Exogorth.
And we're not telling Paul that's what the plan is, so that way he's gonna hop on and he's just gonna have to roll with it. Like, he's just watching.
Surprise ending.
So going into next week, here's what I think is safe to assume, and add on what you guys think could get added on as well. So I think Hera's going to come in with the ghost. We're going to get our first look at the ghost, and I think that there's going to be like, Jacen, you're going to stay. You're not supposed to come. And I think he's going to sneak on board, kind of thing, and stow away, and end up being on the adventure. And I think, we're going to get the lightsaber battle in the forest with Ahsoka, Marok, and Sabine versus Shin. I think Marok's time with us will come to a close next week. I think he's going to get offed. And that's how, because she's with Balin by the end. They're going to fight up there. And Sabine's going to take on Marok and Shin. Like, she's going to take them both. Like, I just think that he's just a cool character that's going to die. And then
you don't
ultimately,
think he's anybody important?
I really hope not, too. Like, I really don't.
I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm with you.
I kind of just like this Inquisitor that's vibed out and survived and does his thing. And this is a cool villain for us to kill. Just kind of like the mini boss before you get to the big boss in a video game. And it's just like a cool battle you go back and redo. And then she's going to meet Balin. We're going to get yet another reference to Anakin, because he has the line about Anakin, and they're going to have some exchange, and it'll lead into, Anakin next week. But I think so. And then they're ultimately going to get away somehow, and something's going to happen where they're going to be in the ghost on the run or something from trying to catch them or something. But that's kind of where I see the episode going. There's obviously going to be a lot more jam-packed in there, but did I miss something? Do you disagree on anything particularly? What's gonna happen? Oh, Zeb Callis cameo, please.
I'm gonna be I'm gonna be so pissed if I think I said it before we went live. I'm gonna be so pissed if right at the Ahsoka gets her butt handed to her by Balin. I don't see that happening, but maybe she loses that fight and she's like kicking herself, and all of a sudden you hear behind her, "Hey, Snips!" Like, and then and it's just that I'm gonna be so pissed if I hear that, and then I gotta wait another week for the Dave Filoni. I'm gonna be so pissed. I probably won't even want to be on next week if that happens.
That would be so good. Could Hera recruit? Could Hera go to? Could we see her grab Zeb before she goes off? I wonder. Oh.
But what'd you say? Sorry, I was
just saying. I wonder. Could we see Hera grab Zeb or somebody before, or Rex even before she ends up going to defy her orders? Like, is she bringing in the cavalry already, or is it going to be like we're going to wait and bring it in later at the end?
Totally see that happening.
That's a good prediction. Yeah,
totally see that happening. Now that the senators were basically like, and so definitely she's going to bring in that old crew. We liberated Lothal. Let's go do this too. So.
Oh man, what do you think, Jay?
Well, look, I was shaking my head when we were talking about Marok. And look, I put it out there like a few weeks back before the show started. And maybe this is like me huffing on some major copium. But look, I'm all in on the Starkiller Marok theory. I'm like all in. I think
I hate it so much. I'll be honest. I hate it so much.
I get you. And I didn't know. Like, look, we have Sam Witwer as one of the voices, and
it's Darth Maul with some dope deadly everything. He survived.
Yeah, exactly.
He survived Obi-Wan's. Yeah,
but I think what's funny. I think Brian, you mentioned it like when we originally talked about it again, though. But I still think that idea of what if we have a confrontation of Anakin's Padawan versus Darth Vader's Padawan, and still going back to that Master and Apprentice theme. I think now is the time to do it. But again, I think like what you were talking about, Tyler, just the overall chronology of like that fight. She's gonna fight Marok first. She's most likely gonna fight Marok first. He's gonna get killed. Then it's gonna go to Balin's skull, and I think that's probably like the more logical timeline.
I'll be honest. I hope she lops off Marok's head in like 2 minutes, so I can stop seeing the Dark Ezra, the Star Killer, the Barriss Offee. Just there's so many theories, and I'm just like, just do the whole Anakin to Dooku slice his head off. We're done with it.
Let
And
the
you
mask explode, see Ahsoka's face under it, like that's be awesome.
She does it, it explodes. Oh, Ezra, you were in there the whole time. I'm so sorry. Like,
you remember the Inquisitor she killed in Tales of the Jedi, how it like melted, like everything.
Yeah,
I would rather see that.
that would be cool.
and just like in like just there's another example of another Inquisitor where everyone's like, "Who's this guy?" Turns out to be no one. So
Yeah,
I like them as these nobodies though. They're like
they
just
ruined
these,
Boba Fett.
like
So
they're just like these because a lot of it was what was it Obi-Wan in the Kenobi show, he tells Leia a lot of them used to be Jedi that turned to the dark side, and I kind of like the idea we don't know who those Jedi are, like they could have been anyone, like, but they did give in to fear, and we know that. And I just kind of like the mysteriousness of them. They're kind of like the our version, this era's version of like the Knights of Ren kind of thing that we saw in the sequels, I guess.
Yeah.
Did you read Inquisitor: Rise of the Red Blade yet, Tyler?
No, I haven't yet. It's on my list as soon as I finish Crimson Climb.
Oh,
lucky dude.
No kidding.
As soon as I finish it, it's right back there.
I hate
about
you.
100 pages in.
I hate you so much.
Oh man. But next week it's gonna be we gotta wait 4 days still.
I'm reviewing that episode too for Star Wars.
Cannot.
Do we know
wait
how long the episode's gonna be?
40? 42?
40 minutes? 42?
I think it's around like low 40s. I think I saw.
Okay,
like
Peter Ramsey is the director too, yeah.
Yeah, Peter Ramsey. It's Peter Ramsey. 40 like 2 minutes. I think it's I think around the same time length as episode 2. I believe it's
good.
like around the same.
I don't know. I
Cool.
think like he's a great director for the Spider-Verse movies, right? He did those movies or worked on it, so I think it's a great choice for the show.
Peter Ramsey, yeah.
I think MB Wilson's right. They're going to make a quick getaway. I think that Baylan is going to play some mind games with Ahsoka. She's going to be like, I'm not here to talk about my past. He's going to dredge up the past, kind of get in their head. She's going to become a little, not necessarily unbalanced, but not quite herself. And that's going to make it a little easier for him to get away, which will ultimately be great because it will lead into Anakin and everything. That's Anakin's showing up in part 5. If it's 50 minutes, like come on. It's a lock. It's a lock. And the next month and a half of our lives is pure bliss, and nothing will change that. Anyway, any final thoughts? Anything you want to get out there before we wrap up our episode tonight?
The weeks really need to start speeding up a little bit. They really do. That's all I got.
That's all, Brian.
That's it. Just hurry up.
Jay, what about you?
No, I think we're good. I mean, just overall impressions, I think that this is still a great episode despite its short length. And like I said earlier too, I think that I like this episode actually more than episodes 1 and 2. So
it definitely had a very easy rewatch vibe to it. You can just plug it on whenever. So that wraps it up for us. Can't wait for next Tuesday. I'm sure there's going to be a lot to chat about next Thursday. You can catch us here same time next Thursday. We are looking forward to it. Brian, close us out.
Till next week, guys. May the Force be with you.
Thank you, everyone.